Of course, they broke away 5 years ago. The story really now is about their decline, about their desperation to survive.
What if everything the world saw on that royal wedding day was only half the story? On May 19, 2018, millions of people across the globe paused their lives to witness what was described as a historic moment: Prince Harry marrying Meghan Markle, an American actress stepping into one of the oldest and most traditional institutions in the world. The atmosphere felt almost magical, the streets of Windsor filled with cheering crowds, the cameras capturing every smile, every glance, every carefully orchestrated detail. It looked like a modern fairy tale, a symbol of change, of inclusion, of a monarchy evolving with the times. But beneath that flawless image, something far more complicated was already unfolding, quietly, almost invisibly, behind the palace walls. Years later, when author Tom Bauer began revealing details from his investigation, the narrative started to shift. What once appeared as a perfect union began to look more like the beginning of a long and deeply rooted conflict. Because if you look closely, the signs were there from the very start. Small moments, subtle tensions, decisions that didn't quite align with the image being presented to the world. Just days before the wedding, the first major shock hit. Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, suddenly became the center of a public scandal after it was revealed that he had staged paparazzi photographs in exchange for money. Images of him reading books about Britain and preparing for the wedding circulated everywhere, but instead of generating sympathy, they triggered embarrassment and controversy. What followed was a series of confusing and rapidly changing statements. At one point, he said he wouldn't attend the wedding. Then he changed his mind. Then came reports of a heart attack, hospitalization, and surgery. In a matter of days, he went from being a central figure in the ceremony to being completely absent. On the wedding day, Meghan walked part of the aisle alone before being joined by Prince Charles. To many, it was a powerful and independent moment, but to others, it was a quiet signal that something was not right within her own family. That absence became even more striking when people noticed that her mother was the only family member from her side present at the ceremony. An entire side of the chapel appeared almost empty, creating a visual contrast that was impossible to ignore. It raised questions that no official statement could fully answer. And as time passed, the distance between Meghan and her father only grew, turning what might have been a temporary issue into a permanent fracture. Behind the scenes, tensions were not limited to family matters. Even within the palace, reports began to emerge of disagreements and frustration. One of the most unexpected sources of conflict was something as symbolic as the wedding tiara. Meghan had been invited by the Queen to choose a piece from the royal collection, a tradition meant to welcome new members into the family. She selected Queen Mary's diamond bandeau, a stunning and historic piece. But what should have been a straightforward process became complicated when requests were made to rehearse with the tiara before the wedding. Security concerns were raised, access was restricted, and communication became strained. Prince Harry himself reportedly grew frustrated with the situation, while the Queen was said to be unhappy with the repeated pressure. It was a small detail on the surface, but one that hinted at deeper issues beneath. Then came the now famous bridesmaid dress incident, a story that continues to divide opinions to this day. Initial reports claimed that Meghan had made Kate Middleton cry during a disagreement over the dresses. Years later, Meghan stated the opposite, saying that Kate had made her cry instead. Two completely different versions of the same event with no clear resolution. What is known is that tensions were high, emotions were running strong, and even minor details like dress fittings and whether the bridesmaids should wear tights became sources of conflict. Within the rigid structure of royal tradition, these details carried far more weight than they might seem from the outside. The guest list itself also broke with tradition in ways that surprised many observers. Unlike previous royal weddings, there were no major political leaders invited, no presidents, no prime ministers attending in an official capacity. Even figures like Barack Obama, who had a known friendship with Prince Harry, were not included. Instead, the guest list leaned more towards celebrities and personal acquaintances, giving the event a different tone, one that felt less like a state occasion and more like a cultural moment shaped by modern influences. The ceremony introduced elements that had rarely been seen in a royal setting: a passionate sermon delivered by an American bishop filled with energy and emotion, a gospel choir performing with soul and depth inside the historic walls of Windsor Castle. For many, these choices were refreshing, a sign that the monarchy was embracing diversity and change. For others, they felt like a departure from tradition, a shift that was perhaps too sudden, too unfamiliar. The contrast between centuries-old customs and modern expressions created a moment that people still debate today. Then there was the cost. The wedding was estimated at around £32 million, with the majority spent on security funded by taxpayers. While supporters argued that the global attention and tourism generated significant economic benefits, critics questioned whether such spending was justified. The event became not just a celebration, but also a point of public discussion about the role and cost of the monarchy in modern society. And yet, perhaps the most revealing detail came years later, during an interview that would once again capture global attention. Harry and Meghan suggested that they had exchanged vows privately 3 days before the public ceremony. The implication left many wondering whether the grand event watched by millions was more symbolic than official. However, the Archbishop of Canterbury later clarified that the legal marriage had indeed taken place at Windsor, and that the earlier moment was simply a private exchange of vows. That clarification only added to the growing sense of confusion and skepticism among observers. Looking back, it becomes clear that the wedding was not just a celebration, but a turning point, a moment where two very different worlds came together, but perhaps never truly aligned. On one side, a centuries-old institution built on tradition, protocol, and stability. On the other, a modern identity shaped by independence, media influence, and personal expression. The clash between these two realities may not have been visible in the smiles captured on camera, but it was there, quietly shaping everything that followed. And maybe that's the real story behind the royal wedding, not the one the world saw, but the one that was unfolding behind the scenes, in conversations, in disagreements, in decisions that would only reveal their consequences years later. Because sometimes the most important moments are not the ones that are celebrated the loudest, but the ones that pass unnoticed until it's too late to change them. So now the question remains, was this truly the beginning of a new era for the monarchy, or was it the moment the cracks first began to show?